Hi, folks. This is Mike Zlotnik, Big Mike, and today's commentary going to cover Jackson Hole, Wyoming meeting of Federal Reserve and some of the key points from the meeting that took place last week. Thank you again for your time. I hope this comes as a benefit to dissect what these academicians and central bank policymakers have discussed. Well, the full disclaimer, we're just going to talk about informational, educational content, not solicitation or offering any kind of advice. If you are interested in our funds, request PPM, private placement memorandum, to accredited investors only, consult with your attorney and CPA professional, usual disclaimer. So here are some of the key points discussed at the meeting. So we're going to dissect and talk a little bit about each point, and I hope this will give you a little color on the Fed policy and what these academicians think. So there was a pessimistic view of the benefits of the quantitative easing, QE, and the difficulty to trim the Fed balance sheet today, or implementation of the quantitative tightening. For sure, it's very easy to implement the QE and very difficult to implement the quantitative tightening to unwind the balance sheet. So one of the key points discussed, it's a well-known challenge in today's environment, and many Fed policymakers have acknowledged that. Now, the next point is really important point. This was a great commentary that the monetary policy, essentially Fed setting interest rates, cannot alone fix the fiscally driven inflation. And fiscally driven inflation is effectively the government policy to spend money through various mechanisms. So approximately 1/2 of the recent inflation comes from the government large amount of stimulus spending, various COVID bills and such that supported the economy during the peak of the pandemic. What this tells us is that the government has overdone it. Politicians don't really understand the economy, and the road to hell is paved with great intentions. So the government has overspent tremendously to support the economy, and that has caused at least 1/2 of the recent inflation. Very substantial point. The government or the politicians will continue to have the urge to spend the money. The problem with that is it causes inflation. Inflation, as you know, the most basic sense, it's $10, 10 apples. When the number of dollars is increased to 20, the price per apple doubles. And that's how we see the inflation, or at least half of the current inflation was driven by the government fiscally irresponsible spending and the policy. The next point discussed that inflation might be persistent for some time. Another 1 or 2 years of substantially elevated inflation is a possibility. Some of the folks, some of the various members of the committee and other folks, this was a conference, so they were not just members of the Fed central bankers and presidents of the various Fed banks. There were other economists and policymakers from around the world. And one of the key points was that it's premature to call CPI peak. In other words, the thought process that inflation has peaked may be premature. And there's a valid argument to that. For sure, there needs to be more time and more data to demonstrate that the inflation might have peaked and is on the way down. So as a result, policymakers would like to see multiple months of a downward trend, called sustainable trend. And that's a valid point. And the reality is most of the decisions are going to be based on past data, and they need to see enough of that past data that the inflation begins to be curbing down. There's another point that the Fed funds rate might have to be pushed above 4% to accomplish that. As you know, we are at 250 to 75, and we have way to go to 2.5, 2.75, and we have a way to go to 4. So that's an important point, that the more interest rates hikes are coming, multiple, to get us to at least 4%, possibly even higher. That's one of the messages that some of the folks were expressing during the meeting. There was another interesting point, and I'm a big proponent of this point. I've said it in the past, and this is the point where the Fed should consider elevating their price stability level higher than 2%. In my view, it should actually be 4% and higher. But one of the folks at the conference mentioned that 3% should be a good target versus 2% goal that has been the foundation of U.S. Policy for quite some time. 2% has been the goal. Increasing that goal to 3% would obviously require consensus from the members, and that's what they would call stable price if the inflation stabilizes at 3% or below. So that's an important point. There was another conversation, or multiple conversations, that inflation is a raging inferno, and that it's a big problem if it is not battled swiftly and harshly. So some of the folks were pushing that point, that the inflation is a much bigger risk to the U.S. and world economy than putting the economy into a recession. So that's something that was discussed. The other interesting point was that U.S. stuck in slow growth mode for substantial amount of time as it exits pandemic. And the projection that was circulated for the next 5 to 10 years, GDP growth rate might look like 1.5 to 1.75% per year on average. That's obviously concerning. Years of slow growth could mean that we are in some kind of a sustained economic recession if the Fed puts the economy into a prolonged recession. So it's unknown. It's obviously speculation, but this was circulated. Jerome Powell continues to say that the policy will have to be restrictive. So restrictive policy stands for some time, in the words of the Fed chair. Another interesting comment that was made during the meeting is that the main concern is inflation rather than the labor market, and labor market data continues to be strong. But the point was that even if labor market data started to soften, in other words, unemployment rate started to increase, it would be less of a concern for the Fed than to get the inflation under control. And in the past discussions, we talked about the fact that it's very difficult to bring inflation under control without getting unemployment pushed up anyway. So this point is reinforced, that they're going to pay less attention to the labor market. And then the Phillips Curve, I showed that graph in the past. Phillips Curve identifies the relationship between the unemployment and inflation, and it's very difficult to curb the inflation without pushing unemployment higher. So another interesting point was discussed how much to raise during the next meeting in September. And this, soft consensus is not a sure thing, that increase between 0.5% to 0.75 is what is on the mind of many of Fed policymakers. So we'll talk about that in the next slide. That's a likely outcome. And then the good news is, at least the positive news, that the inflation might be curbing, was that the personal consumption index for July that came out recently was only 0.1% increase from the previous month, which is very, in essence, good news that inflation might be slowing down. This is one of the data points that makes Fed policymakers believe that there may be slowing inflation as the result of Fed aggressive monetary policy, pushing the interest rates high and fast. So that was the case. Conclusions. Again, these are conclusions that, this is my opinion based on reading minutes and details of the meeting. Just trying to summarize this for folks in a very simple and easy way to think about this. So the Fed will continue to increase interest rates until they see multiple months of data showing inflation is moderating. And multiple months means multiple months. Probably 2, 3, 4 months, who knows, maybe even more, of substantially curbing inflation before they're going to take the foot off the gas pedal. So what does it mean today? We are going into September. Probably they're not going to take the foot off the pedal through the end of this year, possibly even early next year. So the next increase, as I mentioned previously, in September, is estimated to be in the 50 to 75 basis points. Sorry, I'm not 50 to 75%. It's a point, 0.5 and 0.75. And I meant to say here is 50 to 75 basis points, about 0.5 to 0.75%. And there will be multiple increases in 2022 until we likely get Fed's funds rate above 4% target. And at that point, there's a possibility that the Fed will take the foot off the gas pedal. So I hope this was helpful, and enjoy your week. Just wanted to help you dissect the information from the meeting. So thank you. Have a great day.